بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. We're continuing on with the chapter on Ikhlaas and Jihad and Nia, sincerity and having the proper intention. Last week we finished the first hadith of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, إنما الأعمال بالنيات. We just some quick review questions. So we discussed the different types of hijrah to al-makan, right? Making migration from places to places. We mentioned 6 different ones and categories. And then we talked about 2 other types of hijrah. Does anybody remember or recall those 2 types of hijrah? So hijrah to al-makan, and then which one? Yeah. From sins, yeah, hijrah al-amal. So leaving sinful acts for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, migrating from those things that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, migrating away from bad companions, migrating away for those things that distract you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we said the third one, there's another type of hijrah, and that would be from, so the first one from the place, the second one from the actions, and the third one from the person, right? If a person has some evil, we mentioned that it's permissible to boycott him or migrate away from him or stay away from him under certain circumstances. And we mentioned, in non-Muslim countries, it's not advisable because it could push them further away from the deen. We mentioned dunya and discussed the meanings of dunya linguistically, and we described some of the ayat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described for us in some of the ayat in the Quran what the dunya entails or what it encompasses. Linguistically, what does dunya mean, or where does it come from? Dana, which means lowliness, right? Something low. And also adana, something that's close, right? Because it's something that's right in front of our faces and it's easy to get distracted by it. And in the ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it as something that is a distraction or an illusion or, like a fleeting, something that's fleeting, that's going away from us. And we mentioned some of the different aspects of the dunya. And then, وَإِمْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا, about the fitna or the attraction from the opposite sex, how to be aware of that. Then we discussed some of the biographical information about Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala and Imam Muslim, right? Then we discussed also the books of Hadith. We said the most authentic Hadith are what? متفق عليه, between Bukhari and Muslim. And then after that, Bukhari, Muslim, Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, and Ibn Majah. Yes, mashallah. And then also, some scholars like to add Al-Muwatta of Ibn Malik as one of the most authentic Ahadith books, but they don't really classify it because there's a lot of statements from him and from the companions and the tabi'een. So today's hadith, inshallah, we're going to the next one. عن أم المؤمنين أم عبد الله عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يغزو جيش الكعبة فإذا كانوا ببيداء من الأرض يخسف بأولهم وآخرهم. قالت يا رسول الله كيف يخسف بأولهم وآخرهم وفيهم أسواقهم ومن ليس منهم؟ قال يخسف بأولهم وآخرهم ثم يبعثون على نياتهم. متفق عليه. هذا لفظ للبخاري. So this hadith was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, but this particular narration was by Imam Bukhari. So roughly translated, on the mother of the believers, the mother of Abdullah, Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that the Messenger of Allah says that the Kaaba will be attacked basically with an army. And as the army is going towards the Kaaba, the earth will swallow them up, from the first of them to the last of them. And then Aisha radiallahu anhu, because it's a great army, basically she said, why will they, like all of them basically, the first and the last, the whole army be swallowed by the earth? And there are people who are not like basically from the army. Aswaqihim is like those people that are doing business, or they came for transactional issues. They were just going along with the army because it's a huge procession basically that it's implied from this hadith. It's a huge procession going towards Mecca. So there are people that are not part of the army, and the Prophet ﷺ said that the first of them and the last of them, all of them basically will be swallowed by the earth, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will resurrect them according to their intentions. Narrated by, like we said, Bukhari and Muslim. And then inshallah we'll do a brief biography of Aisha radiallahu anha, because last time people said they wanted to discuss some of the biographies, inshallah. So she, as described in the hadith, is the mother of the believers, right? Min ummahat al-mu'mineen. And this is a special title given to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, because nobody is allowed to marry the wives of the Prophet ﷺ after the Prophet has passed away. So they are considered our mothers. And this is mentioned in Surah Al-Ahzab specifically. And from the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, who do you think are the two most famous? Khadija and Aisha, right? Those are the two most famous. So she is one of the most famous of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and she was one of the youngest wives of the Prophet ﷺ, the daughter of the closest companions to the Prophet, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wa radiallahu anha. From a young age, basically she exhibited high intellect and intelligence. There was a narration in which the Prophet ﷺ, he found her playing, when she was younger, with a winged horse. And, she was barely like 5 at the time, something like that. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he asked, do horses have wings? Right? Like joking with her to make her laugh. And she said, yes, the horses can have wings, because it's mentioned that the Prophet Sulaiman's horses had wings, right? So just imagine she's a child of 5 or something like that, and she knows the history and the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam, and that he had like winged horses, right? So this is showing from a young age that she was very intelligent, and it was known that she used to memorize like what we'd call like a supercomputer, or like a photographic memory. Anything she heard once, she would always keep it and memorize it. She also remembered very minute details later in life from a very young age. She was chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The messenger said that you were shown to me twice in my dreams. One time a person was carrying you in a silk piece of cloth, and he said to me, she is your wife, so uncover her. And when he uncovered this silken cloth, he found Aisha radiallahu anha. And then he said to himself after seeing this dream that it is something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She married at a young age to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there is some controversy about that. However, it's mostly like modern controversy, right? Because in the previous cultures, it was not something like abnormal for an older man to marry a younger woman. And even today in many societies in other parts of the world, this practice is still done. And there's nothing wrong with it in their societies, right? In Western culture, Western societies, it's something that's strange because it's not practiced anymore. But even up until the Civil War, this was a common occurrence. There are books and books about women as young as 10 or 11 marrying Civil War generals, right? So, and also, like we know, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if it had been something wrong or abnormal, then the mushrikun, or the disbelievers, would have said something about it to discredit the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, we can't find any narrations or such, statements from them. So, I don't want to get into the history behind it and the differences amongst the scholars, but in general, just to nip it in the bud, it was something that was a common practice. It was legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Prophet ﷺ married her at a young age, and she was the only virgin that the Prophet ﷺ married. So obviously it was not for shahawat or desires, right? But it was something that was inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a hikmah, a wisdom that we can tell, because she was so intelligent and had such a strong memory that being the wife of the Prophet, she narrates to us many ahadith we would never know from the household of the Prophet except it was from her. Some of the basically special qualities of Aisha radiallahu anha, that she will be from the highest places in Jannah, right? From Khadija, Fatima, Maryam, and Aisha, and Asiya bint Imran. They were considered from the highest women or the best women of Jannah. She was, like I said, shown to the Prophet ﷺ in a dream and legislated by Allah for the Prophet to marry her. And she was the only wife of the Prophet ﷺ that was not previously married. The Prophet ﷺ died in her arms, in her house, right? And there's a hadith that says that the anbiya, the prophets, they only die in the most beloved places to them, right? And so it shows that the Prophet ﷺ loved Aisha and being with Aisha radiallahu anha. Even at the time of his death, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it wasn't meant, for his time to be in her household, but the other wives of the Prophet ﷺ knew how much he loved her, so they sacrificed their days so he can be and spend time with Aisha in that household. Also from her blessings or attributes, she was from the daughter of Abu Bakr, who was the closest companion to the Prophet ﷺ. So she was raised in a household of some of the strongest of believers. And she was born and raised a Muslimah. Another unique characteristic is that during his time with Aisha in the marriage, he would only receive revelation in her household when he was with her. And then in another narration, Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anhu, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked him, who was the most beloved of people to you? And he said, Aisha, right? Aisha, radiallahu anha. And then he said, how about from the men? And then he said, her father, Abu Bakr, right? So this shows her place with the Prophet ﷺ. She was a model wife to the ummah of Islam, and she endured, much suffering for the sake of Islam. Even in their household, sometimes the Prophet ﷺ, who was the best of humankind, he wouldn't have much to eat. It says that they would go like 2 months sometimes without having any type of cooked bread or cooked meat or anything like that. The aswadan, they would only have water and dates basically for months on a time. Imagine the best of the ummah, and that's how he lived. And she was patient with that. Even when wealth would come to their household, she would go and give it in charity on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ. She also was very keen on learning the ahadith or the statements or the deen from the Prophet ﷺ. She asked questions often, and for this reason she became one of the great scholars of Islam. One of the early scholars of Islam, one of the women scholars of Islam. There are many narrations and ayat revealed concerning Aisha radiallahu anhu. There's a story of ifk, the false accusations. We don't have time to go through that whole story, but basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved her reputation in the Quran that we recite until this day. So her story is mentioned in the Quran. And like I said also, she was, the Prophet ﷺ his head was upon her lap when he passed away, and she was trying to take care of him up into his final moments, radiallahu anha. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, she was married to the Prophet for approximately 14 years, and she lived after that about 48 years more, mostly in Medina. And she took an active role in the affairs of the Muslims. When she saw an evil, she would speak out against it, and she would fight for what was right. She did regret, because the Prophet ﷺ said that you will go out and you will hear like the dogs barking in a certain province, and I wish that you had not gone out then. And it's because she went out for battle. There was a dispute amongst the Sahaba. Again, there's not enough time to get into that, but it was one of the greatest tragedies of early Islamic history. And many scholars, when they talk about this, some of them, start crying because it was a sad moment of history. But Aisha, radiallahu anha, she said that she wished she had, when she, realized the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and she realized she should not have gone out into these affairs. Basically, she retired from public role in politics after that and just became like a full-time teacher up until her passing away. She narrated over 2,000 ahadith, and she's from the prolific narrators of hadith. She's amongst the top 5 narrators of the hadith. And many of the companions would say that I had never seen anybody more knowledgeable in the obligatory acts in the sunnah and poetry from Aisha radiallahu anha. Even in medicine, she had some knowledge. This shows us that knowledge is not the property of any particular person, whether he be male or female or Arab or non-Arab, and that even women can be great scholars of Islam. If we look to the books of our narrators and the teachers, subhanAllah, many of the top scholars of Islam, their shuyukh were women shuyukh. And it was an concentrated effort by the disbelievers to push women away from religious knowledge. Because this is basically affecting the whole ummah. How? Because they're not able to pass on that knowledge to their children. Right? So they purposely had women, taught that it's not for them to be scholars in Islam. And it hurt the ummah, because unfortunately they fell for this trick. But in our history, the knowledge, there were many female scholars and teachers of Islam, and inshallah we should try to revive that sunnah. She died roughly at the age of 67 years old, and Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he led her janazah, and she was buried in Baqiyah. She actually gave up her spot next to the Prophet ﷺ to Umar radiallahu anhu, because at first, Abu Bakr was buried next to the Prophet ﷺ in her household, and she had planned to get buried there as well. But when Umar requested, after he was martyred or assassinated, basically his final wishes were to be buried next to his closest companions, and Aisha gave that up. So, if we go to Medina now, we see the Prophet ﷺ was buried, and then Abu Bakr, and then Umar. So she took her place in Baqiyah, which is also a blessed place. But we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is like concise, summary of her biography. There's books about, mashallah, much more detailed. But we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless her and have mercy upon her and raise her in the highest ranks. She is verily from our mothers, the mothers of the believers, radiallahu anha. So she said in this hadith that Jaysh yaghzu al-Jaysh al-Kaaba. So an army will basically go to attack the Kaaba. Many scholars say this is towards the end of times. And some scholars say that it is when the Mahdi will appear. So when the Mahdi appears, there's supposedly going to be certain leaders that are fighting with each other at that time. And one of the leaders will actually send his army to go and take out the Mahdi. The Mahdi will go to Mecca, and his name will be the same as the name of the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And he will be from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. Yes? The Mahdi most likely will be from somewhere in Arabia, Allahu A'lam. But he's from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, and it appears he will be speaking Arabic, obviously. And at first, this is another topic, but he might not have been the most religious persons, but it says that Allah yuslihuhu fil layla, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will rectify his affairs in one night. He at first doesn't believe he's the Mahdi, and he will try to deny it, but people will be seeing visions of him and dreams, etc., and they will recognize him by his characteristics that the Prophet ﷺ described, and they will go and try to give him bay'ah in Mecca. At this time, the leader will send his army to try to wipe him out or destroy him, because they think that he's a threat, obviously, and that's what happens with most dictators. They see that any opposition is a threat. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes, according to this interpretation, this army to be swallowed up by the earth. And then she says, the Prophet said that it's in a wide place, basically, and the first of the army and the last of the army, all of them will be swallowed up at like one time. And Aisha asked, how could this be when there were people with them, like aswaqihim, those people who are just regular people. And he said, they will all be taken, but they will be resurrected, and this is the point of the hadith, according to their intentions, right? So even, it's a point in the hadith that even if you are a good person, but you're with bad people, you might be taken to an account. Allah, He says in the Quran, Surah Al-Anfal, ayah 25, وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْكُمْ خَاصَّةً. Like, fear the fitna that will not only affect the people who are unjust. Meaning that if you are around people who are unjust, you might be affected by this fitna as well. And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ النَّاسِ إِذَا رَأَوْا الْمُنْكَرَ فَلَمْ يُغَيِّرُوهُ أَوْشَكَ أَنْ يُعَمَّهُ اللَّهُ بِعِقَابِهِ. That if people see evil and they don't try to change it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could cover everybody with His punishment. So we derive from these ahadith that if you see people upon misguidance or injustice or transgression, don't be with them, don't be around them, because Allah can take them and you might be with them, right? Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, He's not going to hold you at account except according to your intention, which is the point of this hadith. However, we don't want to associate ourselves with those type of people. In general, we want to have a good ending when we pass away, right? That's why the scholars, they say, always try to be on point, because you don't know when the angel of death will come to take your soul. You want to be in the best of states, in salah, giving sadaqah, reading Quran, struggling for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making da'wah, doing righteousness, right? Because it could be an instant that it's your time, it's written for you. There's so many people we know that are young, healthy, but it was their time and they left. They didn't expect to not wake up the next morning, right? So always try to surround yourself with righteous people and good actions, so you won't, fall under this category. There are some other instances where the attack on the Kaaba was prevented by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does anybody recall? Ashabul Fil, yes. Abraha, he was the leader of Yemen, and he tried to raise an army of elephants to go and attack the Kaaba. And as they got close to the Kaaba, they stopped. And they would not budge. They would not go further. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent down upon them, the us-Saliheen, طير أبابيل, right? The birds were sent down with like pebbles, basically, to destroy the army of this leader from Yemen, right? Because he tried to build a church in Yemen to kind of go against the Kaaba, and he wanted people to make Hajj to his church, so that's why he went to try to destroy the Kaaba, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped that army. What's another time that Allah stopped the army or stopped people from going forward?
Generally speaking?
What's that?
You said generally speaking, like outside of Fir'aun?
No, about the Kaaba specifically,
Kaaba.
yes.
Okay,
So the army of Abraha, and then Yazid? No. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ actually, it says that the Prophet in Hudaybiyah, when he was getting ready to enter into Mecca, ناقته حرنت وأبت أن تمشي. His camel, and they call it qaswa, stopped and refused to go forward closer to Mecca, right? And then the Sahaba said, خلت القصوى خلات القصوى أو خلت القصوى. Like she basically, gave up. She let down the Prophet ﷺ, the camel. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ما خلت القصوى وما ذلك لها بخلق. That it was not her that gave up or stopped to go forward. And that's not from her character. Basically, it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who held her back. Right? So these are certain times that it was protected, and it will be protected again when this certain person tries to send his army to attack the Kaaba. towards the end of times, there will be somebody who will actually destroy the Kaaba. That's like when the earth will be no more Muslims left. And that's the only time, basically, or the final time that it would ever happen. So, like we said, the point of the hadith is that the shahid is يُبْعَثُوا عَلَى نِيَاتِهِمْ. They will be resurrected according to their niyyah, right? According to their intentions. So those who are righteous and those who are not righteous will have, their accounts taken by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is the most just. But like we said, we don't want to be associated with people on the wrong path, right? Always try to be on the right path with the people of the right path. Any questions on this hadith before we go? Pretty self-explanatory, inshallah. So the third hadith, عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا هجرة بعد الفتح ولكن جهاد ونية وإذا استنفرتم فانفروا متفق عليه ومعنى this is from Imam Nawawi لا هجرة من مكة لأنها صارت دار الإسلام. So Aisha, she says, the Prophet ﷺ, he said there's no migration after the Fath, after the conquering of Mecca. وَلَكِنْ جِهَادٌ وَنِيَّةٌ. However, there is jihad, the struggling in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and intention, right? Intention for doing migration for the sake, or for struggling for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِذَا اسْتَنْفَرْتُمْ فَانْفِرُوا. And if you were asked to go forward in battle, answer the call. And this hadith is agreed upon also by Bukhari and Muslim. And the meaning, as Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala says, لا هجرة من مكة. There's no hijrah, after the Fatha, meaning from Mecca, because Mecca became a Muslim land, right? So there's no more hijrah after that from Mecca. But like we said in the other hadith, the hijrah from Dar al-Islam to from Dar al-Kufr to Dar al-Islam still is available until the Day of Judgment, right? And then the term jihad is, obviously like a hot topic we find, but the original term is something that's from our deen, and it is a beautiful word that means to struggle in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make His word supreme. It's not only militarily, but it's also spiritual. When you do jihad an-nafs, right? In terms of the military aspect, every single society that was successful, from if you study ancient Greeks to the ancient Romans to the ancient Persians to all civilizations up until the British Empire, the French Empire, the American Empire, right? All of these, they're built upon what we would call military and a doctrine, right? Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, Kitabun yahdi wa sayfun yahmi. That for any society to be successful, you need a book that guides, meaning like a constitution or a set of laws to be successful, and you need an army to protect it, right? He's saying that any society that lacks one or the other is not going to be a successful society. Even if you have the best, constitution in the world, the best laws in the world, etc., but you don't have a military force or an army or a police force to enforce these laws, it doesn't really matter, right? And even if you have the best army in the world, but you don't have any sets of principles or any sets of laws or any constitution or doctrine, then that army also would eventually dissipate, right? Because the people can't last upon just military force. So for any successful society, you need both. So therefore in Islam also, the term jihad encompasses also military aspects because it's something that's legislated for any successful society, right? The types we said, it could be like militarily, spiritually, speaking the truth, enjoying the good, forbidding the evil, right? All of these are forms of jihad. In fact, one of the greatest martyrs, the Prophet ﷺ said, is the one who speaks the truth, is Hamza, radiallahu anhu, and the one who speaks the truth in front of a tyrant and is martyred for that, right? So he didn't use, military force or anything like that, but he spoke the truth and was martyred. So jihad also encompasses speech, speaking what is right, calling people to the truth. Also, in terms of what we're going to talk about in jihad, it's done by the state basically, or those who are in charge, right? In terms when we're talking about the military aspect, it can't be done on an individual basis. Like, no, it's not for anybody just to go make up their own rules and go and fight or cause mischief or destruction of property or killing and all these type of things. That's not correct Islamically. It has to be done under order, under the state. So Jihad and Nia, Jihad is basically struggling for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Nia, the Imam is saying that it's like a correct Nia for Jihad, that you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the rules and the proper etiquettes of that. And the main Nia that one has in struggling for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لِتَكُونُوا كَلِمَةَ اللَّهِ هِيَ الْعُلْيَا, to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word superior over the earth. وَإِسْتَنْفَرْتُمْ فَانْفِرُوا, if you are asked by the leader of your state or leader of the Muslim Ummah to go forth, you must answer that call. Allah says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَا لَكُمْ إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ انْفِرُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ ثَاقَلْتُمْ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. O you who believe, why is it that you were asked to go forth for the cause of Allah and you held tight to the earth, meaning you didn't go forth? أَرَضِيتُمْ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا مِنَ الْآخِرَةِ, were you like pleasing or preferring the life of this world over the akhirah? فَمَا مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا بِالْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. The life of this world compared to the next life is nothing. إِلَّا تَنْفِرُوا يُعَذِّبُكُمْ عَذَابًا أَلِيمًا وَيَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ وَلَا تَضُرُّوهُ شَيْئًا. If you do not go forth, Allah will punish you with a severe punishment, and He will bring or change you with another people, and you will not harm Allah in the least. So going out, this is one of the times that it becomes obligatory upon the Muslim to go out into the battlefield. Like I said, this is all under an Islamic state and an Islamic society, when the leaders of that society ask you to go forward. The other time, the second time that it becomes obligatory, is when the enemy has come into your land, right? They're at your homes attacking you, right? You have the right, or you have the duty actually to repel them. The third time it becomes obligatory is if you are on the battlefield, right? And you're in the line for battle, it is not permissible to turn your backs. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا زَحْفًا فَلَا تُوَلُّوهُمُ الْأَدْبَارَ. O you who believe, when you meet the disbelievers on the battlefield, do not turn your backs to them, like do not run away from battle. The fourth time, it's when if somebody has a certain knowledge and skill set that can help the Muslim army, for example, he knows how to make certain airplanes, or he knows certain skills that are needed for the Muslim army, and the leadership asks him to come aboard, it becomes obligatory upon that person to go and help. And in the past, subhanAllah, the fighting or the battle or the struggling for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was something that they did on a regular basis, either to defend the Muslim lands or to spread Islam in lands that were basically filled with injustice. And you'll find in history, subhanAllah, some of those lands, the common people called the Muslims to come and help them, right, to relieve them of the injustice that they were facing. And you can go back in history and see this is one of the very few nations where the people from opposite nations were actually calling them to come and help, right, and to leave them in oppression. And they actually lived better under the Muslims. The Muslims did not, it's not allowed for us to force others to convert. There's no such thing as conversion by the sword, right? You have to convert with your heart, right? So there's many narrations that they lived and they worshipped in their own religions for many years or centuries without the Muslims enforcing anything or bothering them, actually protecting them. So this is, the point here anyway is Nia, and that is your intention. And we mentioned in the first explanation of the first hadith that, one of the people who were thrown into hellfire was the martyr because he didn't have a clear intention. It's narrated upon the Prophet ﷺ that he said, لا يكلم أحد في سبيل الله والله أعلم بمن يكلم في سبيله أي يجرح إلا جاء يوم القيامة والجرح يثعب اللون لون الدم والريح ريح المسك. he said, the Prophet ﷺ, that nobody is injured in the cause of Allah, and this is the point of the hadith, and only Allah knows who was injured in his cause, right? So only Allah can tell the intentions of the people. Except that that wound will come forth on the day of judgment for that person, like dripping. Basically, the wound is like actively being, taking the blood coming forth, for example, and the color will be the color of blood, but the scent will be the scent of misk, like one of the most beautiful scents. So basically, that will come as a witness for that person on the day of judgment that he had this injury for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the point being that only Allah will know the intention. So one should, in any act of worship, always remember to have pure intentions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we mentioned also, and it's important at this point here, that good intentions don't justify wrong actions. Some people, they misinterpret these ahadith or these ayat, and they try to take actions on their own, and they cause mischief or hardship or corruption, and it actually harms the Muslims way more than it helps. Because Allahu A'lam of their intention, but their actions caused harm to the Muslims. Like some of the actions that happened in the past, it harmed so many Muslims, and it stopped so many good like da'wah and everything like that. Whether they were used by the non-Muslims or not, there's many theories about that. But the fact is, harm was brought because of actions done without proper, in accordance not to the proper way of the Quran or the Sunnah. So not only having proper niyyah, but having proper actions is of the utmost importance, especially in these affairs, right? It shouldn't be taken lightly. These are like affairs of the state. Like you don't have people making military decisions right outside of the government or outside of the army or the navy or the air force, etc. Right? It's not an individual thing, it's a state thing. So with the consultation of the scholars and the leaders of a state, unfortunately we don't really have a real Islamic state now. So our struggle, the J word, is giving da'wah, practicing the deen, purifying our heart, trying to become better Muslims and teach people the proper religion, inshaAllah. So we'll end on this hadith, and next week we'll do the hadith of Jabir. If you guys have any questions or comments, please go ahead. Or do you guys want to do one more hadith? I don't know. One more hadith? طيب. So hadith number 4. عن أبي عبد الله جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري رضي الله عنهما قال كنا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في غزاء فقال إن بالمدينة لرجالا ما سرتهم مسيرا ولا قطعتم واديا إلا كانوا معكم حبسهم المرض وفي رواية إلا شاركوكم في الأجر. رواه البخاري عن أنس رضي الله عنه قال رجعنا من غزوة تبوك مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال إن أقواما بالمدينة خلفنا ما سلكنا شعبا ولا واديا إلا وهم معنا حبسهم العذر. So basically in this hadith, Jabir he says that we were with the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that there are people in Medina, this is when they were going out for battle basically, that any like valley you pass through, or any way that you go or any valley that you pass through, they are with you or they are with us. Their sickness held them back. In another narration, anything that we went through in the battle, they are partners with you in the ajr, getting the same reward, because they had the intention to go out, they wanted to go out too, but they were sick, or in another narration, they were held back by a valid excuse, right? So it's also, how is it showing us the intention here? What's the point of this hadith, like in illustrating intention? The hadith?
You get a reward based on your intention.
Yes, but how? So he says, the Prophet said, while they were in the battle, or going out for battle, verily in Medina there are some men that you like did not, travel or cross a valley except that they are with you. Their illness held them back. And another narration, he said that except that they got the same ajr as you get the same ajr. But they didn't go with him, so
maybe they made the effort, or they had the effort behind it, they were sick.
what is that called? What's the effort there? The Nia, yes. So they had the intention, they wanted to go out with the Prophet ﷺ, but because of their sickness or other excuses, they weren't able to go out. But because their intention was pure and they wanted to go out, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the reward, the same reward in His mercy. Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, he was from the close companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and also one of the best narrators of the Hadith. He narrated over 1,500 Hadith. He was known to be one of the authorities of fiqh in Medina. And it's said that his father, basically, they both gave the pledge to the Prophet ﷺ. They're both from Medina, from Khazraj, the tribe of Khazraj. And he converted to Islam when he was only a young boy, following his father. And he actually went and gave the pledge to the Prophet ﷺ. And his father was one of the martyrs of Uhud. He wanted to go out and battle too, but his father wouldn't let him because he had 7 sisters. So the Prophet ﷺ, his father said he should stay with his sisters and take care of them. And the father, radiallahu anhu, was martyred. There's a story about Jabir, kind of a miracle with the Prophet ﷺ that happened. When his father died, he had a lot of debt. And Jabir, obviously didn't have much wealth either, and he has now responsibility over his 7 sisters to take care of them because they were orphaned. So the Prophet ﷺ said to gather some dates and put them in piles and gather the creditors, like the people that your father owed debts to, right? And so he went, and he didn't think there was enough dates to even cover a small percentage to the creditors, to the ones that the father owed debts to. But they would come and get their share of dates, and he would give and give and give, and subhanAllah, the pile never decreased, right? Until he paid off all of his father's debts, satisfying every single creditor, and there were still heaps of dates left, he said, right? Like not a single date had been taken away. And this is one of the miracles, subhanAllah, for the Prophet ﷺ with Jabir, radiallahu anhu. He was known to be loyal to the Ali, during the fitna of Muawiyah and Ali, he sided with Ali, which is the correct opinion. And some say that there's narrations that he was poisoned and assassinated towards his final years. Wallahu a'lam. But we know that he was a great scholar of Islam and he helped to spread the religion far and wide. So, alhamdulillah, it's good to study about our companions and narrators of the hadith. So, he is the narrator of this hadith, and in it basically is showing us that even if you have like a normal type of worship or ibadah that you always do, but some sickness comes upon you or prevents you, you'll still get the reward for that. Or if you're traveling, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا مَرِضَ الْعَبْدُ أَوْ سَافَرَ كُتِبَ لَهُ مِثْلَ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُ مُقِيمًا صَحِيحًا. That if a servant becomes sick, or he travels, or she travels, their reward will be written for them as if they were healthy or not traveling, basically, like a resident, right? So it's good to always establish the sunan while you're healthy, while you have time, while you're present, because subhanAllah, if you become sick, you will get the reward of doing that continuously, right? Or if you're traveling, when you travel, you're allowed to do qasr, right? You don't have to pray like the complete nawafil like we normally do. And also you get written all of that ajr as well. This is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْمُتَمَنِّ لِلْخَيْرِ الْحَرِيصُ عَلَيْهِ. Whoever is like hoping for good, these ahadith are showing us that if you have good intentions and you hope for good and you try to strive for good, you will get the reward for it. Those people in Medina, they wanted to go out, they wish they can go out, but something prevented them, they will get the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And then there was another narration that showed, reaching higher levels of righteousness with intention. That the Prophet ﷺ, some poor companions, they came to the Prophet and they said that they have the rich people, they're like passing us an ajr. They have, like the salat, like we have the salat and everything like that, but they can give extra money and we can't. We don't have any money to give. And the Prophet ﷺ said, أَفَلَا أَخْبِرُكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ إِذَا فَعَلْتُمُوهُ أَدْرَكْتُمْ مَنْ سَبَقَكُمْ. Should I not tell you something that you can do it, that you will reach those who even like passed you, for example. وَلَمْ يُدْرِكُمْ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا مَنْ عَمِلَ مِثْلَ مَا عَمِلْتُمْ. And nobody can reach that except if they do the same that you do. And they said, or the Prophet taught them to say, تُسَبِّحُونَ وَتُكَبِّرُونَ وَتُحَمِّدُونَ دُبُرَ كُلِّ صَلَاةٍ ثَلَاثَ وَثَلَاثِينَ. So that you should say Subhanallah and Alhamdulillah and Allahu Akbar 33 times after every salah, right? So that's why they're trying to reach the level of, they're reaching higher levels than the rich people, because even though they can't spend, their niyyah was like they wish they can spend it, and the Prophet has been giving this type of ibadah that they can do to try to catch up with them. So it's showing with their niyyah, they're reaching higher levels. But then the rich people heard of this, and they started to also do the tasbih and the tahmeed and the takbir after the salat, and they went and complained to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. That's the blessings of Allah, He gives it to who He wills. So you can either strive and do more than them, or khalas, they can beat you on that. Like you can't compete, basically. So the point is, anyways, from these different ahadith narrations, is that when you intend to do an action, even if you're prevented from doing it for a legitimate reason, you will get the reward for that action. And that's from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So always intend righteousness, always intend good. And like I said, when you have the ability to do the good, do it before it's too late. Get yourself used to it, and Allah will write that reward continuously for you. طيب, we'll stop on this hadith, inshallah, hadith number 4, and continue hadith number 5 next week. Any questions or comments, inshallah? طيب, jazakallah khair. I will ask you guys questions next week, inshallah. So go back and review what you can from the hadith that we've taken, and then inshallah we'll continue on the next chapter. So some hadith don't require long explanation, like those we'll just read and translate, inshallah, and keep going forth. But the main point from all these ahadith, remember the heading of the chapter, which is intention and having the proper intention, and sincerity and having proper intention. So all the things that the Imam is putting after is supporting that title. طيب, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.